Welcome to Film Courage. This is episode 158. I'm Karen Warden.
And I'm David Brandon. You can find our archives on iTunes, filmcourage.com, latalkradio.com, and Movie Garage.
If you haven't heard yet, we've announced the world premiere of our film, Goodbye Promise.
Yeah, and this is not an April Fool's joke.
No, it's not.
2 months from today, Goodbye Promise is going to be screening in Los Angeles at the Downtown Independent on Friday, June 1st, 2012, from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Please visit goodbyepromise.com for the trailer, video interviews, and ticket information. Our feeling is that it's going to sell out, so we encourage you to purchase tickets in advance.
Today's guests are Steve James and Alex Kotlowitz, the filmmakers behind this year's Film Independent Spirit Award winner, The Interrupters.
The Interrupters is a documentary which spotlights the fascinating stories of 3 violence interrupters working to protect their Chicago communities from the violence they, too, were once a part of.
The film follows Amina Matthews, Kobe Williams, and Eddie Bocanegra as they go about their work in the community in the midst of processing their own past experiences with the very things they are working to prevent, inspiring hope and redemption among people in the crossfire as well as themselves.
Shot over the course of a year out of Cartum Quinn Films, The Interrupters captures a period in Chicago when it became a national symbol for the violence in our cities. During that period, the city was besieged by high-profile incidents, most notably the brutal beating of Darian Albert, a Chicago high school student whose death was caught on videotape.
The film attempts to make sense of what C Spire's T.O. Hardiman calls simply, quote, the madness.
You may also know Steve James from the '94 documentary Hoop Dreams, and Alex from the best-selling book There Are No Children Here, the story of 2 boys growing up in the other America.
Please welcome to Film Courage via telephone, Steve James and Alex Kotlowitz. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Great, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. You know, we first want to thank both of you for extending your press tour to appear on Film Courage here today. You know, we know that you've been talking about this film for the past 18 months, and we're just super grateful to have you guys extend it, you know, to join us here today.
Yeah, thank you. And we'd also like to give a big thanks to Tim Horsberg, and I hope I'm saying his name correctly, of Cartum Quinn Films in Chicago for arranging this interview today. And you can find out more about cartumquinn.com and at Cartum Quinn on Twitter. All right. So, Alex, we'll jump right in, and we'll start with you. Where did you work before you became a journalist and an author?
Before I became a journalist and author. Well, when I got out of college, I mean, it was a long time ago. I worked on a cattle ranch for a year, and then found my way to an alternative newspaper in Michigan, which is where I began my work as a journalist. And I freelanced for 5 years, and then actually was a correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, where I covered urban affairs for the paper.
Oh, wow.
You didn't waste too much time at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I left there about 20 years ago to write books and magazine pieces, and now film.
Okay.
With Steve.
Wow.
And so, Steve, what about for you? What before you got into documentaries? What was your day job?
Well, it wasn't as romantic as that cattle ranching thing. I mean, I was a student, and I fell in love with film when I was at the end of my undergraduate days, and then ended up going to graduate school and studying film. But along the way, I had a series of awful jobs. Until I moved to Chicago and began a career in earnest. And Hoop Dreams was part of the motivation to move to Chicago, in particular, to start that film. It was an idea I'd had when I was in graduate school.
Mm-hmm. So having those series of awful jobs, did it light a fire under you? Because you kind of said, when I'm so sick of this, I need to do something with meaning.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of what you do. My daughter just graduated from Scripps out there, and she's working at a cafe in San Diego, a beachside cafe, so that doesn't sound too bad. But it's not,
Sure.
It's not the kind of job she wants or is going to do with her education. So, I think jobs like that can kind of focus your mind on what it is you really want to do. And I think it's a pretty typical path for a lot of young people.
Agreed, yeah. Alex, why are you so drawn to writing about poverty, violence, and education?
For me, I've been sort of really more than anything, I think, drawn to writing about outsiders, people on the outside looking in. And I think often because I think it's people on the outside who have a much clearer perspective about what's going on. I also think you can sort of take a measure of society by how we sort of end up treating the most vulnerable. And so for my first book, for instance, spending time with these two young boys in public housing projects in what had to be one of the worst neighborhoods certainly in Chicago, if not nationwide, you sort of begin to sort of take a look at sort of where we're at as a nation, sort of how we treat and imagine our most vulnerable. I also tell you that there's something exhilarating about knowing that you're telling stories publicly for the first time, stories that haven't been told before. I mean, that can be pretty exciting. And I think also, you see people who somehow are managing to stay erect in this otherwise slumping world around them. And it can often, as certainly was the case with The Interrupters, be incredibly inspiring.
Mm-hmm. Steve, why are you drawn to these similar themes?
I think for me, some of the roots of it were growing up. I grew up in Hampton, Virginia, small city down in the Tidewater area, and I grew up in a city that was very much a black and white community, substantial black population, a place where race and class were not really talked about much. And there was a high level of civility in people's, general goings and comings in that community, but there were these fissures and tensions that underscored it. And I think I felt that fairly acutely, in part through my participation in sports, in basketball in particular. It sort of brought me into contact with people on the other side of the tracks, if you will, and on the other side of the racial divide. And I think that was probably where the seeds were planted. And it was sort of, as I got older and got interested in film and started to care about, what goes on in the world, I think issues of race and class kind of came to the fore for me in that regard.
Okay. Well, now the two of you seem to have, to us at least, looking as outsiders, the ideal situation. You've made your vocation, your occupation, and that's something that all of us want to do. We want to monetize our passions and things like that. What was the turning point in your careers? How were you able to cross the threshold?
You mean being able to monetize our passions, as you say?
Yeah. And I
have a career.
Right. I mean, so many people, it's a hobby, whether it's a mom blogger or whatever it is, and they'd love to be able to quit that day job and do something else. How are you able to turn the corner with that? Yeah, either one of you. Jump in.
Well, I can speak for myself. I mean, I sort of began my career as a journalist, and so had a series of jobs, first at this alternative news weekly and then at the Wall Street Journal, where I thought I'd last maybe a couple of years and ended up staying for a decade. And it was probably as good a job as you could get in daily journalism, in that they really let me go off and tell the kinds of stories I wanted to tell. But for me, it was really writing my first book. It's what I think gave me the ability to really sort of set out on my own and carve out a career writing, doing radio and some film, and finding ways to tell these stories that for me were exciting, were filled with surprises, stories where you sort of felt like you were having some impact. And it's a pretty good life. Having said that, I can tell you that it's a bit of a roller coaster. You've got these periods, and I'm in one right now, where you're sort of trying to find your way to your next project, and you sort of look down the horizon and you think, my God, where am I gonna get my claws into something?
Right. Yeah, it is scary.
Yeah, for me, it was not dissimilar. I mean, I didn't really, when I got out of graduate school, moved to Chicago. I started to work my way up the food chain in commercial filmmaking, and primarily TV commercials. There was a vibrant industry here where you could work and make a living, and it was sort of an ideal thing for me because I was pursuing this passion project, you might call it, Hoop Dreams, on the side. So I could work in the commercial business, and I could work for a few weeks at a time, doing everything from the most humiliating tasks as a production assistant to eventually working my way up to a little bit better position. But I always knew that I could, the good thing is that when I was done with a particular job, I could take a couple of weeks and go work on this thing that nobody was going to pay me to do. And so, I think, and again, just as Alex talked about his first book being kind of a watershed for me, when Hoop Dreams was completed and all that happened with that film, obviously that was a huge turning point for me career-wise, and really made a career possible doing what I wanted to do, which was to direct films. And so, ever since then, I haven't really had an actual staff position in 27 years or so anywhere. It's always been move from one project to the next. And as I like to say, sometimes you're self-unemployed, as you try to figure out what the next thing's going to be and plan to raise the money. Yeah, exactly.
Do you both find a freedom in that? For some people it could be scary, and I think for others it's exhilarating because you don't know what the future holds, and it's a sort of.
I think it's both. I mean, I think it's one of those things where, depending on when you talk to either of us, it's either exhilarating or scary.
Right.
I think it's just. But I think I've ultimately discovered about myself is that I really much prefer the freedom of, if you can make it work. I much prefer the freedom of being my own boss and being able to sort of pursue projects I want to do, and I've been able to be successful in getting, most of them off the ground in a way that I could, remain employed.
Sure.
How important is it as a writer, storyteller, or filmmaker to pursue stories that speak to the core of who you are?
Well, I mean, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
What's that?
Go ahead.
Steve, we'll start with you, Steve.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, I think that, the core of who you are. I mean, that's kind of a tough one to know. I mean, I just find that over the years that I become interested in a topic or something or a story, and I don't often know exactly why it is that I'm compelled by it. In some cases, it's more obvious. I mean, with Hoop Dreams, it was more obvious. But, I think sometimes you don't really figure out what it was that really fascinated you about a given story that you pursued until later. Sometimes not until it's done, or even well after in a weird sort of way. But one of the things I've noticed over the years with me is that a lot of the ideas for films come from places where I'm upset or disturbed by something, and it may be my own reaction to it. It may be that I feel like I don't understand it, and it bothers me, and I want to understand it better. And I also find, like Alex said earlier, I'm drawn to people on the margins of society. I'm drawn to subjects for films that most people and society don't tend to deem as worthwhile subjects for film. They're not famous. They're not necessarily hugely accomplished in any way that society recognizes. And so, I just find that a lot of times it's the people that don't think their stories are worth being told, or that have anything especially great to say, are usually some of the more interesting stories that often have a lot to say.
And Alex?
And I think, stories, sort of inform who we are. I mean, they help us make sense of the world and ourselves. And I think one of the sort of glorious things about what we do, if you're doing it right, is, as Steve suggested, is, every time you sort of venture out on a story, it really is this kind of journey of discovery and constant astonishment, and often you end up at a very different place from where you began, and you hope that you can sort of take readers or moviegoers along that same kind of journey, where they come in with all their set of assumptions and then leave a book or a film looking at the world just a little bit differently, and maybe looking at themselves a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm. Alex, The Interrupters movie begins with you sitting in on a ceasefire meeting for 3 months. You then wrote an article called Blocking the Transmission of Violence that was featured in New York Times Magazine, and then Steve reads that article and he calls you that same day and he says this may work as a documentary. So going back to those ceasefire meetings, we've heard that you say that you heard about the meetings from a friend. Just curious, was it your intention all along that you were going to write about The Interrupters, or what were you trying to get from those meetings? Why were you attending?
Right. Well, when I first went down to ceasefire, it really was in some ways a kind of an apology, because I had, I think like a lot of people, you can't help but live in the city of Chicago and not be familiar with ceasefire. Their bumper stickers are ubiquitous; they're all over the place, and I thought yet one more gang intervention group, and he asked that I come down to visit them, and I began attending these Wednesday meetings. And you sit in on those meetings with those men, and if there were time there were just a few women. Still are, in fact. But you sort of realize, this is this incredible window onto a part of the city, and you also sort of begin to hear some of the outlines of the stories of the personal journeys of those sitting around the table, and I was just immediately drawn in. And so right away I called my editor at the New York Times Magazine and suggested there might be a good story here, and so they gave me the green light. But while I was working on the story, Steve and I are longtime friends, and we had been talking about doing something together really in the dramatic realm. And as I was working on this story, I began thinking that, if you could get the kind of access we needed, it might make for a really interesting documentary. Just sitting around and you look at the faces of those men and women around the table, and you can imagine the stories of their own journeys, and then of course just spending time with them on the streets. And then, as you said, when Steve read the piece that Sunday, he called and said, I remember well, actually Steve and Steve's wife read it, and because I remember Judy felt the same way, and Steve said, let's see if we can, make this work.
So, Alex, did you pitch Steve before the article was published? Because the idea sounded like it was already there.
Steve and I talked about it. I was talking to Steve about, we often are telling each other what we're working on, and so I was telling him about this. So he knew about it, and I told him and I don't usually, I've got to say, my sort of, my real home is as a writer, and so I don't usually think about the pieces I'm doing as films or as documentaries. This was a really unusual instance for me, I worried. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Go ahead. You were just going to say it. Go ahead.
No. Well, I was just going to say that I worry about in film getting the kind of intimacy that you can get in print, and I think what was clear in working with Steve that we were going to be able to get that. Steve's just a master at that in his films, and sort of finding that intimacy with his subjects, and that's not easy with the camera. And so then the question was access.
So Steve, how soon was it? After you read this article, that you're on the phone with Alex, and then before long you're meeting with the ceasefire brass and the interrupters. How much time passed before you were literally diving full steam? And no time passed.
Not a whole lot. The day it came out, I think I called Alex. The day it appeared in print, and I think Alex's biggest concern was, it had been difficult for him to be close to mediations, even as a print journalist, because of the nature of the work. And Alex and I have often talked about how, I would say, I'm envious of what you're able to do in print, because you don't really have to be there in order to write it in a way that makes it feel for the audience like we are there. Whereas in film, yeah, you can interview people about what happened, but it ain't the same as being there, and that becomes crystal clear in a film. So, and then, so I think one of the things we talked about that Sunday was how could we go about getting the kind of intimate access, and how much intimate access would we need in order to tell this story? And we talked about the fact that, we're not doing reality TV, we're doing a film, and in a film, you don't need endless mediations that you're privy to like you do in reality television, because what we want to do with each mediation is to dig deeper and understand it. And so with that in mind, we fairly quickly, because of Alex's great relationship and context to Ceasefire from doing the article, we fairly quickly went about meeting with the Ceasefire brass, with Gary Slutkin, the founder, and with Theo Hardiman, the creator of the Interrupters program, and then with other people on the staff, and then eventually with some of the interrupters themselves, to really talk to them about the idea of a film, and talk very, very pointedly about this question of, could we get a camera to some of these mediations and capture some of them? And we kind of came away from that process feeling like we would be able to get some mediations, and we wouldn't be able to be in every situation. We'd be able to get some, and so on the basis of that, we went out and shot just a couple of days, no real mediation in those couple of days. We put together a demo and began the process of pitching it for funding, and we were able, over the course of the next 5-6 months, to put enough funding together to kind of launch the film. So.
Right. And we began slowly. I mean, we really began by filming those Wednesday meetings, and it was a way to sort of get everybody around the table, comfortable with the camera, comfortable with the process. And while we were there, Theo, who, heads the Interrupters, he would urge everyone there to call us if they thought they could get us out on the street. And we had a clear understanding with everybody is that, please just call us whenever there's anything going on, and if we get out there and it feels unsafe, or if somehow you feel compromised by our presence, or if people didn't want to be filmed, we'd walk away. And there were moments that we did. But for the most part, I think in the end, at least I was surprised how open people were to having us there.
Yeah, we missed some mediations. There were it took us a while. It's like every film. There's just a certain sort of organic process that happens regardless of the topic, subject matter, subjects, I think, where it's always slower going in the early stages as you get comfortable with people, as people get comfortable with you, and then at a certain point you kind of turn a corner, and that access and that trust kicks in, and it's remarkable how open people can be, and how much access you can gain if you put in the time and are there. And that's, we couldn't have done the film the way we did it if we didn't both live here. This was the kind of project where I had the camera at my house, and when a call would come in to either Alex or myself from one of the interrupters saying there was a situation and we could maybe go along, we would leap into action, the two of us, along with co-producer Zach Piper, who also did the sound work, and we would just, we just go out. We were on call just like they were, one step removed.
Wow.
My goodness.
What were some of the objections? Can you share with our listeners in terms of the ceasefire meetings? You said it was slow going at first, which I'm sure anybody would be resistant to someone coming in with a camera to their meetings. But can you share what some of those initial thoughts of resistance were?
Well, I think some of the interrupters. There was one interrupter we actually very much wanted to follow, and he has a family and young kids, and I think he felt, and understandably, somewhat protective of his family, and so decided in the end that he didn't want to be a part of the film. There was also another interrupter who we followed for a while. We filmed a lot with him and his family, and it became apparent over the course of the first few months that he was really uncomfortable with us going out with him in the streets, and listen, I can understand that. I think we ended up with 3 individuals, Eddie, Amin, and Kobe, each of whom are exceptional in their own ways, and even with them, especially with Eddie and the Latino community, we had real difficulties in filming. The Latino gang hierarchy didn't like the idea of us filming, and so we, in the end, had to go film with much of our filming with Eddie in a different neighborhood.
In the classroom setting.
A classroom setting, and also in Cicero. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it sort of worked out, because what fascinated us about Eddie more than anything was the personal journey that he was on in terms of trying to come to terms with what he had done, and the sort of ways in which Eddie is a guy that thinks outside the box in terms of he really questions his effectiveness and questions, is there a better way, and is always looking for interesting and different ways to reach kids. And so that kind of became his story, which was great, because, as Alex said, when we tried to film in his neighborhood, and we did get, one really terrific scene, it prompted the leader in one of the gangs to basically say no more, and that was that. I just think that what was special about Kobe, Amina, and Eddie too, is besides their individual strengths and approaches, was that they each, in differing ways, found ways for us to be there that did not compromise the work they were doing. They were able to. Kobe was great at being able to play it off as no big deal, which has always been my philosophy of filmmaking, which is to always treat it like it's no big deal. It's just a couple of people with a camera and sound gear and nothing more. And Kobe had a way of in the neighborhood just telling people, it's like, we were his film crew, and he would just say they're with me and I'm coming, and that's not going to be a problem, right? He didn't fret over it. And again, there were times when we stepped away, but by and large, it was amazing how skilled he was at getting us into those situations. It made you realize just how skilled he was when he was in the streets. Kobe was a very effective guy in the streets who was well loved and respected, and we saw that very much on display.
Well, I love, too, how you show how there's such pillars of strength in the community and to be looked up to, but then you would take this behind-the-scenes look where they still doubted themselves and they still, dealt with traumatic, situations of abuse and what have you, not having a father around. Did you know right away that structurally and story-wise you were going to focus the stories on these 3 or possibly 4 interrupters, or was this part of the evolution of the film you said earlier, how it just sort of developed on its own?
Well,
I think what we knew is what's that?
Go ahead.
I think what we knew is that we wanted to film a year in the life of the city and about the violence, and the interrupters would kind of be our eyes and ears out there. Having said that, we didn't really know a whole lot about their backgrounds. We knew, obviously, with Amina who her father was, and we knew with Eddie that he had committed murder when he was 18. But we didn't know much beyond that, and so again, that sort of was stuff that we kind of discovered. And to be honest, it took a while for all 3 of them to really fully open up with us. I think for me, at least, what was real exciting in terms of story and what was you certainly didn't expect were kind of all the kind of secondary characters you meet in the film: Flamo, Mikey, Vanessa, Capricia, and it was those stories that we saw unfold literally before our eyes and didn't know where they were going to take us.
This past Thursday, March 29th, a nephew of Miami Heat star Dwayne Wade was one of 13 men shot, 2 which were fatal during a violent 6-hour stretch in Chicago. So, we're still seeing this hit the news. This epidemic is real. What kind of reservations did the 2 of you have at the onset of making this film? I mean, because you're both family men and you're putting yourselves right in the middle of the storm.
Yeah, I think we both spent a fair amount of time in these kinds of neighborhoods in the course of the work we've done, which is not to say, though, that we feel like we can move with impunity and do anything we want at all. But I think we did have a level of comfort, and that was further sort of underscored by the fact that we were with Kobe, Amina, and Eddie, who carry with them tremendous respect and credibility in these communities, and as a result, I think that we rarely, if ever, felt in any real danger. And the truth is that if you're a journalist, it's not true in war situations anymore. It used to be true there, but so many journalists have been killed in war situations in the last 10 years. It's remarkable. But in situations here in tough neighborhoods, in general, I've found that I feel I'm probably one of the safest people there, because especially once people know why you're there and what you're there for, and there's far more danger for the residents there, because they're the ones that are getting caught up in situations that are sometimes personal, sometimes gang-related, but, genuine altercations. I think a lot of people, if you've not spent time in these neighborhoods, you think that if you're a white person going into these neighborhoods that you're automatically targeted for attack or something, or a potential attack, and it's just not true.
And one of the things is, you go into a community like Englewood where we spend time, and we're so clearly outsiders. I mean, these three white men with Zach, and people, and then we've got camera and sound gear. People want to know who we are, what we're doing, and so you do immediately sort of have this kind of connection with people, just because of who we are.
So is that a situation where literally almost every day that you guys are filming that you're continually telling people like, hey, this is what we're doing? I mean, is that's all part of the process for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer that you answer people's questions, you engage people. We don't go in and try to be a fly on the wall in that classic cinema verite sense. We go in and through our main subjects that we're following, we engage with people and we meet with them and we talk to them. And when they have questions, we answer them. And word gets around. We don't have to talk to every single person for them to understand why we're there and what we're about. Word travels. And again, the fact that we're with a Kobe, Amina, or Eddie makes all the difference in the world. I mean, no one says no to Amina. About anything. And so if we're with her, that carries with it and, a certain credibility that you can't get otherwise. And I know this from, I've gone out with cameras without a Kobe, Amina, and Eddie into tough neighborhoods, and I'm always very careful in those situations, not because I'm fearful of being hurt, but I'm always very careful about indicating to people exactly why I'm there and what I'm trying to do, because people see cameras. There was a time maybe when people were enamored with the whole idea that cameras were in their neighborhood and they're going to be on the evening news and all that. Mm-hmm. Increasingly, people want to know what you're there for, right? Yeah. Because they've seen too many things on the evening news or on television where their community has been portrayed in a very negative light, and they want to know what you're doing and why. And so I think so being able to communicate that to people in various ways, and again, because we spent so much time there, word traveled. I mean, we were in Kobe's car a lot, driving around Englewood, and there were days where we filmed a lot, and there were days where we didn't film much at all. But we would see and meet people, and people got the message.
Right. And you also have to remind yourself too, when we're filming individuals who really have no obligation or responsibility to talk to us, and so we're kind of there at their invitation, and we're asking them to be as open as they can with us. And I think one of the things that Steve and I share in the way we go about our work is this feeling that we have a responsibility to be as open and candid as we can with people about what we're doing. I mean, obviously, you can't know everything. But we always were, as Steve said, trying to engage with people. I think working on a film like this in some ways is having this extended conversation.
You're listening. Yeah, we're not people who go in. Everyone goes in with preconceived notions. That's what we do in life, right? The great thing about this experience is getting them turned upside down. But we always go in, even though we may have our own preconceived notions of what we might see and what we expect and what we think is going on. We take an approach which is we're not the experts at all. We're here to try to understand. Mm-hmm. And I think when you genuinely communicate that to people, it's remarkable how open people in tough places, in tough neighborhoods, in tough living situations will be, because they're so used to people not doing that. They're not used to the media coming in. They're used to the TV news coming in when a murder or a double murder happens and doing their thing and then taking off. They're not used to people coming in a situation like that and sticking around and saying, okay, what really is going on here that led to this? Why did this happen?
Wow. Yeah, we love it. Point. I mean, you know, we've watched this movie 3 times this week and just sitting back and
my hat's off to you.
And listening to you guys go into the process, you know, it just really relishing this conversation here. We are on the line with filmmakers Steve James and Alex Kotlowitz of the 2011 Sundance and 2012 Film Independent Spirit Award winning film, The Interrupters.
So you get clearance to, you know, turn the cameras on and you get an okay from Ceasefire. Did anything significant happen on your first day of filming, or did it take time for things to kind of heat up and then different incidents happened?
Oh God! I mean,
I can't remember what the first day of filming was.
Well, the first day of filming would have been a meeting, and then we hung out with Tim. You know, but that was like way early. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was when we were creating the demo, and I don't think there's anything in the demo that we created to raise money for the film that ended up in the final film, you know, at all. So, you know, I do remember that first meeting, filming that first meeting. And when we put the camera on somebody who was talking at the meeting, several of them just seized up and got very quiet, and they were like, does that camera have to be on me? I mean, there really was that trying to grapple with the fact that there was going to be a camera in these meetings that had never had cameras before, where they've been free to speak as candidly as they wanted without any concern of anyone else hearing it. So,
Alex, what was it like for you to be out on the streets as part of the film crew?
Well, you know, for me, one of the things that I really relished about this experience is that I'm usually working by myself, and so there was something really gratifying about having this collaborative effort. I mean, Steve and I have talked about this between ourselves, but I can tell you, I don't think I've ever had so much fun working on a project before. And I think part of it was working with Steve and Zach, you know, having other people to sort of bounce ideas off of, you know, when, you know, you begin to sort of have doubts. There's somebody else who's saying, no, you know, we just need to go and film this. No, let's not worry about it. And then the other part, of course, was just spending time with Amina, Eddie, and Kobe, which was both fun and inspiring. Not to say there weren't disturbing moments along the way, but I think for me the real difference between working on this film and doing my books or magazine pieces was just that it was collaborative. That there were, you know, 3 of us out there all the time. And sometimes I get a phone call about something going on, and I'd call Steve and I'd say, Steve, you know, I'm not sure it's really worth going out for. And Steve would say, you know, well, let's do it. We're up. It's, you know, it's midnight. Let's just go and do it. And so it worked both ways, that we had each other to sort of say, you know, maybe it's worth going to do this. So I don't know. There was. It makes me. I'm about to get back to my writing, and as much as I'm looking forward to it, the thing that I have a little trepidation about is sort of going back and sort of working on my own again and disappearing for a month.
You can pay me to go along if you want.
I appreciate it. You want to carry my pad?
Yeah. We can text you in a few minutes.
You know, I mean, we've touched on it earlier, and I just want to see if we can draw out more information, you know, because it really is amazing. You know, when you watch Steve's work here, you know, he just sort of knows where to be with the camera. You know, he gets very close. He gets very intimate. It's almost like he's invisible with the camera. You know, he just gets to the point where he's just exactly where he's supposed to be. And I wanted to, at first, direct this question to Steve to see how he does it. But I think I want to turn it to you, Alex. Like, from what you observe, from being close with him, how do you think Steve is able to achieve this effect in his films?
You know, I got to tell you, first of all, when we began work on this, you know, one of the things I was concerned, I had done some TV work before, and I was really concerned, and one of the things that drove me crazy about it often was just the excessively large crews we'd have going out in the field, sometimes as large as 6 or 7 people. I mean, it was about as clumsy and as awkward as you could get. And so early on, I suggested to Steve that maybe he consider shooting, and Steve doesn't traditionally, though he shot some of his films, he doesn't traditionally shoot his films. And so Steve ended up doing the camera work here, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I think one of the remarkable things about the film is just the visual intimacy you have with the characters, and that's really a credit to Steve's camera work. And I think that one of the things that's great about Steve is he talked about earlier. I mean, for Steve, it's not about being a fly on the wall. I mean, we were constantly talking, engaging with people, laughing with them, ribbing them, and so Steve, even sometimes when we in the midst of filming, and I admire this, that Steve had the good sense that, you know, maybe this is a moment where he would stop and just sort of ask, he or I would, you know, sort of ask somebody questions in the moment, which really got people thinking about what was going on. And I think some of the best stuff we got was in the moment, where people sort of, as they were just sort of thinking just on instinct about what was taking place. I remember Steve early on in and you probably remember this, Steve, as well, in the interrupter meetings when we were filming, and Steve would get up really close to people, and you could see it made them uneasy. And at one point, I remember Tio coming to Steve and saying, "Steve, do you think you can maybe pull the camera back a little bit and stay back a bit?" And we did for a while, and Steve was right back.
That's great.
I mean, Steve, is there anything you can add to your process, and any more you can share?
Well, no. I mean, I think Alex has described it well. I think that the key again is building those relationships with your subjects, and I've over the years it's also really important who's on the crew. In other words, I've always tried to work with people who are really good people, not just good at what they do. That have an ability to connect with, because it's not just you. Like if I'm directing and someone else is shooting and someone else is doing sound, I'm not the only one engaging them, and it certainly wasn't the case here either. I mean, Alex, me, and Zach were out there together. Alex is taking the lead on asking questions when we have those moments, or when we do the sit-down interviews and stuff. And it's just as important that those relationships be strong between all of us and the subjects, so that people feel a level of comfort. Because, you know, it's sort of paradoxical in a way, but it's not when you think about it. I've found over the years that the more your subjects feel like they have some control, the more in control they feel of this process, the more open they are then to revealing themselves. That it's when they feel that you're there, and that if they do something that's a problem for them or is embarrassing for them, or that they have they're sorry you were there for, that they have no control over it, that you'll take the approach of, oh well, we got it, sorry, that's the ground rule. That's when people start to lose that level of trust. But we were always very clear with people about that, and those relationships are key, you know.
Right. In fact, we had an understanding with our three main subjects from the very get-go that they would get to see a rough cut of the film, and obviously we weren't handing over editorial decision-making, but that if there were things that they felt somehow compromised them or others, that, you know, we would have a conversation about it. In fact, there is a scene that we ended up taking out of the movie where Eddie goes back to talk to a guy now in his 40s who was, when Eddie was much younger, was shot and paralyzed, and it was because of that shooting that Eddie went and sought revenge. And Eddie can't understand why this guy is still a part of the street. And there was this very, you know, compelling, poignant scene where Eddie goes and kind of confronts him and outside of a high school, and the guy's drinking, he's still in the game, and in the end Eddie watched it and just felt Eddie didn't worry about himself as much as he worried about this guy, and so we ended up, you know, it was a hard decision, but we ended up taking it out of the out of the film. And I think, I talked about sort of the collaboration, between us, but I think the other part about, as Steve suggested, in making a film like this, it is a kind of collaborative effort with your subjects. It's not that they have editorial control over the film, but you really are trying to sort of, you don't want to put them in positions that are going to leave them vulnerable or compromise them in any way.
Sure.
Yeah, you want to get to that place where you feel like you're all making the film together in a sense. Right. And it's not like they're going to come to the edit room and say, I think you should put this shot there. That's not going to happen. But they feel invested in it just as you do, sure. And they're invested. And that's why it's like, when people go and make documentaries, one of the questions they ask is, about paying them and do people want to get paid to be in films and stuff like that. And yeah, there are situations you encounter as a filmmaker where people bring up money early on. And that's usually a bellwether. If someone is concerned about are they going to make money from this, that may not be the situation you want to put yourself in filming-wise for either of your sake, because documentaries rarely make any money. And, of course, you can't pay them to be in your film because that would violate all kinds of journalistic ethics and compromise the experience. But, in the case of this film, all three of the interrupters, they never brought up money. It wasn't until we finished filming and we were in post that we did what we typically do, which is we then sat down and said, if this film should ever make any money, then we would try and, sit down with you and work out some kind of equitable way for you to share and benefit from that.
Yeah.
They themselves never brought it up because they were invested in doing this film for all the right reasons, which was they cared about this issue, they cared deeply about it, and they were intrigued by the experience, of having this experience.
Sure, yeah, definitely.
Right. I mean, Eddie, in fact, talks about how cathartic it was for him to be able to talk. He's obviously given a lot of thought to what he did and to sort of finding his way to forgive himself. And I think having these conversations with Steve and myself, and there were a lot of conversations there over the course of that year, he talks about how it really sort of helped him sort through some of that.
Yeah, you definitely see that on camera unfold. As we wrap up here, sorry guys, we're running out of time, but watching the film, we didn't see a strong police presence in it. I know in the early part, there was a scene where some of the locals claimed that the police showed up and then they were scared off and drove away. Did you make an editorial decision to cut out any scenes with the police, or were they simply not around?
Well, they really weren't. They're not really that much a part of Ceasefire's work. The Ceasefire maintains certain back-channel connections with the police in different situations, like the Darien Albert one, for example. But by and large, in their day-to-day work, they are the alternative to the police in those communities. That's essentially what they are. And we did at one time talk about wanting to define more clearly the tensions and the ways in which Ceasefire connects with the police in the movie. But at a certain point, some of that is in the movie, but we decided that that's not really what the focus of the movie is going to be. And frankly, if we got into that too much, it could create problems for Ceasefire interrupters in the field for that to be so explicitly detailed in the film. And the last thing we wanted to do was in any way undermine the work that they're trying to do. And so we chose instead to focus much more closely on the work they're doing in the streets, just like we don't really focus much on the organization as a whole either. We're not, it's not a film that really gets into the nitty-gritty of this organization and all the ins and outs of how it began and what's it doing. We focus very narrowly on the interrupters themselves.
Oh, right. And it was kind of a fine line for us to walk. I mean, we were clear from the outset between ourselves and with Ceasefire that we didn't really want to make a film about an organization per se. I mean, obviously Ceasefire is central to the movie, but really we wanted to make a film that took as honest a look as we could at the violence in these communities.
We do have to wrap, gentlemen. I do want to squeeze this information in because from seeing the film, we really wanted to see evidence of the violence diminishing in Chicago, and yet we came across this yesterday. From January 1st to March 29th of this year, there were 474 shootings, 101 of them fatal. And then the previous year, during the same period, 346 shootings, 55 fatal. So, what can we do? What can those listening do? How can we play our part here, dealing with this sort of epidemic that we're facing?
Well, I think there's a lot people can do. I mean, in different communities. I mean, you can volunteer in mentorship programs. You can contribute to anti-violence organizations that are working in your communities that are trying to do work like this or related work. You can, and then of course, Alex and I feel very strongly that the fertile ground for violence in these communities extends beyond just gangs and conflicts. It extends to things like the socioeconomic realities in these communities and educational realities or lack of in these communities. And so I think we feel like there's a host of ways people can get involved that can make an impact in those communities.
Right. I mean, these are communities in which you can see that window of opportunity just closing and closing and closing. And so I think one of the challenges is sort of how do you get these issues back a part of the public discourse, back a part of political debate. And I think that's one thing people can do, is find ways to talk publicly about what's going on in parts of our cities that are otherwise.
And the film has really helped that.
Reflected. Yeah.
The film has helped be a part of that dialogue. It's particularly hard right now, too, with the economic downturn that a lot of people are struggling with. And I think there's this feeling that, well, we've got our own problems. We're not going to worry about those communities when middle-class communities are struggling in their own ways, which are not the same ways, but struggling nonetheless. So it's a particularly difficult time, I think.
Yeah.
We commend you for your work.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. We've been speaking with filmmakers Steve James and Alex Kotlowitz of the 2012 Independent Spirit Award-winning documentary, The Interrupters. For more information on Steve and Alex, please visit theinterrupters.cartermcquinn.com, alexkotlowitz.com, ceasefirechicago.org, at The Interrupters on Twitter, and Interrupters on Facebook.
Yeah, and thanks again, guys, for doing this interview. I know you've done just a ton of video and online press, and we appreciate it. And also thank you for the work that you do and for shining light on situations and people that may not always get a public voice. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yeah.
And we'd also like to say thank you to our guy, Ronan Rosner. He's someone that you seldom see or hear at LA Talk Radio, but he plays a huge part in what we do. So we're very grateful for him. Thank you. And
absolutely. Yeah. I'm trying to. Our guy, is it Tim Horsberg?
Yes,
Am
thank
I getting
you,
that
Tim.
right? So Tim, thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Tim.
I just
he
want
was
to make
wonderful.
sure we get a little shout out to him as well.
He tweeted us, and we responded. We were just blown away that he was interested in having the two of them on the show. So thank you, Tim.
We're back here next Sunday on LATalkRadio.com with YouTube sensation Paul Yosemite Bear Vasquez.
The double rainbow guy.
The double rainbow
Love
guy.
it.
Paul's life changed back in July of 2010 when Jimmy Kimmel tweeted his double rainbow video, making him an overnight sensation. We're going to be talking with Bear Vasquez about his YouTube channel, various commercials, and sustaining an audience. For more on Bear Vasquez, please visit YosemiteBear.net and on YouTube at HungryBear9562.
And that does it for us, folks. Until next Sunday, have a great week.